Okay, so here we are at the entrance to the Yellow Pine Solar Facility. They are beginning to move some ground on this site. And what we have here is the water truck coming to spray down the entrance road. And of course the water truck will be spraying down the site, the 4.5 square mile site, to try to control for dust. Which is a good thing initially, but of course the water dries and the wind blows and picks up the dust. So as they destroy the desert pavement, which you can get a great see, you can really see here the desert pavement in front of the truck, and then the road which they've carved out on the other side of the pavement, desert pavement. So the desert pavement is the intact desert crust. Once that desert crust is removed, as you can see, it actually has been around the entire perimeter of the site. And of course, they'll remove the desert pavement throughout the entirety of this 4.5 square miles. Once that's been removed, what you get is something called poof dirt. And that is the underlayer, and it's just incredibly dusty, as you can imagine. It very easily becomes airborne, and there's a lot of problems with this. One, as far as human health exposure, of course, exposure to dust is never a good thing. We actually have naturally occurring asbestos in our soils here in southern Nevada. And this area, as far as I know, is not a hotbed for the naturally occurring asbestos. The hotbed that they know of is the East Las Vegas, Henderson, Boulder City, El Dorado Valley area. But they're just learning. It's only within the last few years that they started to learn about naturally occurring asbestos. So, the point is that we don't really know everything that's in the soil. Of course, there's certain bacterias, like, something called valley fever that we know about. But think of all the things that we don't know about. So that's one issue as far as the human health exposure. And interestingly, he only gets certain parts. He's kind of spurting the water out in little bursts. And they're also flying a drone around the site today. So what they're doing with the drone is they're looking for the major washes. So the major washes where water naturally flows, they'll fill in with rock. And so that's what they're doing with the drone today. So you can see here the complete fencing. I think this is a really interesting perspective to see the land surrounded by this barbed wire. We got the barbed wire at the top, we got the chain link fence. This had been public land, free for people to camp, hike, recreate, free for all the animals to live on. We've got desert tortoises, we've got kit foxes, we've got all matters of reptilian life. And we're looking at the backside of Mount Charleston here. So we had some snow yesterday, but I don't see any snow now. And it's October 19th, 2021. So I am going to be documenting the destruction of this Yellow Pine solar site in hopes of stopping future destruction. Because this is only the tip of the iceberg in Nevada. What Nevada wants to do, of course, 80% of Nevada is public land. And the Bureau of Land Management is planning to allow solar and wind development on a very large extent of it. So in this particular valley, we're about 8 or so miles south of the edge of Pahrump. I think it might actually be less than that. And this facility will extend out 2 miles from here. So it comes quite close to the edge of Pahrump. Now, looking back there, we're looking toward the California state line is 8 or so miles onward down this road. This road here is Tacopa. You can't really see the road, but we're looking out towards Tacopa Road. You can see a truck driving right now. That truck is driving down Tacopa Road. Looking over here, we're looking towards Highway 160, also called Blue Diamond Road, outside of in Las Vegas. Blue Diamond becomes Highway 160. That's the highway between Las Vegas and Pahrump. So we've got Las Vegas in that direction. You keep going on Highway 160. About 15 miles from this spot is a town called Mountain Springs. Fantastic town, great little restaurant, beautiful place. It's in the Spring Mountain National Recreation Area. And then you continue on from Mountain Springs about 10 more miles and you come to the intersection of Route 159, which goes through Red Rock Canyon. So that's where we are. As you can see, this water truck, try to catch up with him here. The water truck is going to be entering the site up here and spraying down the area where they're starting to work. So something interesting about this site, the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, is not to be confused with Black Lives Matter. So the Bureau of Land Management is testing a new thing for solar facilities. So instead of completely grading the entire desert floor, they're employing a technique called mowing. And they don't really know how this is going to go. But the mowing thing, you know, they'll still destroy the desert pavement, obviously, as you can see here, because we've got heavy equipment going all over it every which way. But what they call the vegetation will not be, the roots will not be destroyed. The vegetation will be mowed down to a height of about 2 feet. So what we have on this site, we have 93,000 Mojave Yucca, and that's an issue. So mowing the yucca just doesn't work. Here is some footage of a yucca. We've got some yucca rings here. This one's a relatively young yucca, probably only a few hundred years old. But these yucca can be absolutely ancient. There's some debate over how old they can be. Some people say 600 years old. Some people say 1,000 years old and even more. But they're truly ancient things. And of course, the Native Americans used every part of the yucca. They harvested the seeds. They used the roots. They used the yucca itself for materials of all kinds to weave into different things. But every part of the yucca was used and cherished. So as you can see, this one here is not even a particularly tall yucca. But to give you an idea, it's about, I'm standing next to it, and so it's taller than I am, and I'm 5'7". So this is like nearly a 6 foot tall yucca. Okay, so this is nearly 6 feet tall, and it will be mowed to a height of only 2 feet. So as you can see, you know, it's going to be mowed down to there. And as far as we know, the yucca do not grow back. So 93,000 Mojave Yucca on this site will be permanently destroyed. The other vegetation that we have a lot of on this site is creosote. Okay, and creosote looks like this. And so mowing this down to a height of 2 feet, you know, these can actually get quite tall also. This is a very small creosote, but they can also, you know, I've seen creosote 10 feet high. And the outlook for regrowing creosote might be better than the yucca. But of course, there's all kinds of other complications and things to consider. One is that, of course, the solar panels are going to be over the site, so it'll be shaded from sun. And of course, these plants are adapted to grow in the sun in the Mojave Desert. The other issue is that they'll have to do some kind of weed control. And so there are dozens of herbicide products that are approved to be sprayed on solar fields. Some of them are incredibly toxic. There's one made by Bayer that is used on the railroad, and it's so powerful that they only spray it one time per year. On the solar field, we're gonna have to find out how many times they spray it and what they intend to spray. But as you can imagine, all of the herbicides being sprayed will deter any eventual regrowth of the plants themselves. Now, when we're thinking long term, these solar sites, they have a lease of about 25 to 30 years. So, 30 years from now, hopefully we'll have some really superior energy technology. But 30 years from now, the BLM might say, okay, we're not going to renew your lease. Or the company might say, okay, we don't want to renew the lease. And then the desert can start to take over and regenerate itself. Of course, it will take hundreds of years for the soil to recoup its crust. It's a really interesting thing about the desert crust. The desert crust is, I called it before, a desert pavement. It actually has a network of mycelium running through it. It's really incredible. So it's like the soils themselves have this life running through them. And interestingly enough, scientists are just starting to discover that the desert soils store carbon, just like forests. So all of the plant life, the yucca and the creosote, of course, that is all carbon storing. But even the soils themselves may account for what scientists are now calling a carbon sink. Carbon sinks. Carbon sink is not a new term, but applied to the desert, it is somewhat. They did a study, they did a 10-year study starting in 2009, actually, on the Nevada test site, and about, a couple hours north of here. And it really showed how the Mojave Desert soils themselves sequester carbon. So as we bulldoze and ruin these topsoils, we are unfortunately losing that carbon sequestering capacity. The soils will no longer store carbon. Of course, the plants will not be there to store carbon. And so we are going to offset some of the good that we do by getting away from fossil fuels. Now, of course, the sane and wonderful alternative to this terrible, needless, outdated destruction of our wild desert ecosystems is, one, to build solar and other renewable infrastructure where we use it. So that would be in the cities. So of course, rooftop solar, and my favorite, which is building canopies over parking lots. Think of the space that we have in those Walmart parking lots, all of our grocery store parking lots that are just massive. And then it serves two purposes. People get to park in the shade, and then of course we're creating electricity. That also negates the need for massive transmission lines. So they're planning to build transmission lines around the state of Nevada, thousands of miles long, just going all over, up and down the state and across the country. And of course, transmission lines cause fires. So many of the wildfires in California have been caused by transmission lines. The transmission lines, unfortunately, also lose some of the electricity that they're carrying. So that can also be problematic. So here we're entering, you can see the water truck is entering the site here, and you can just see the state of the soils. Okay, so this was all wild desert pavement, and now of course they're spraying it down with water to try to reduce the amount of dust that gets into the air, because now, as you can see, we've got an incredible amount of dust. So I'm standing here, so he didn't spray water here, but we've got dust 6 inches thick, even a foot thick here, where these trucks have really pummeled. Okay, so what they're doing here is they're reattaching tortoise fencing. So the small fence is for tortoises, and And that's what they put up first, so that the tortoises removed from the site cannot re-enter. And then the large fence with the barbed wire at the top, of course, is for people, so that people cannot easily get into the site, protesters like us. So they've taken down the people fence so that people and trucks can get through, and now they're putting back up this little tortoise fence. As you can see out there, I'm going to be talking to the site manager to see what exactly they're doing, but what I believe they are doing is filling in washes with rock. Okay, and I spent a lot of time walking in those washes. There's some beautiful flowering plants. There's, of course, a lot of yucca and creosote, but I noticed that the wildflowers and the flowering plants seem to grow in the area. And so what we have here, we've got actually a tortoise biologist. So the woman, or she's fencing, so she's told me that she is a tortoise biologist. And so she is helping the water truck driver re-secure the tortoise fence. Basically right now, it's interesting because it's like they're very careful, you know, they seem to be very careful about the tortoises, but if we really wanted to take care of tortoises, we would not destroy their habitat. And what's happening to the tortoises? Basically, they've been dug up from their burrows and they've been relocated across Dakota Road. Not right there. I think they're mostly relocated down in that direction in an area called Stump Springs, the Stump Springs area of critical environmental concern. They estimated, the company NextEra Energy estimated that there'd be about 40 tortoises found on this site. Completely ridiculous for a 4.5 square mile site. And then of course they found about, you know, close to 150 tortoises. And they removed those and they put them in Stump Springs, and within, I don't know, a couple weeks, 30 or so, maybe 20, between 25 and 30 of the tortoises were eaten by badgers. Okay, so wild badgers just came out and ate those tortoises. You know, the other issue with relocating tortoises that way is that, you know, it's like here we've got, say we've got 150 tortoises living on this site. It's like, well, you know, they need a certain amount of ground. You can't just keep dumping all the tortoises into one site. It doesn't make any sense. You know, there's not enough resources and habitat there for the tortoises to thrive. But that's why they have this short tortoise fencing up. It's so that the tortoises cannot return to their burrows, because that's what they do. The tortoises try to come back to the burrow that they've been dug up from. So, yeah, here we have the beginning. They are just beginning to do what they call moving ground on the Yellow Pine solar facility. So we're encouraging people to rethink green. Of course, we need to get off of fossil fuels, but there just hasn't been any discussion about how to do that. You know, we really didn't talk about how to build the solar, where to build the solar. You know, this is not the answer. This has been a completely pristine, untouched ecosystem, and it is sequestering carbon just like a forest is. And now it's going to be turned into an industrial wasteland. And again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. If we let the Bureau of Land Management and the state of Nevada go through with this, so many miles of Nevada are going to be just completely destroyed. And, you know, Governor Sisolak has been totally complicit in this. Governor Sisolak has said, yeah, come on, solar companies, Nevada's open for business, come on over. You know, without even consulting communities. Of course, so we've got the community of Pahrump, a city of about 35,000 people just a few miles down the road. And this is only the first solar facility in the area, like I said. Other solar facilities will be much even closer to town and in fact go right up to people's properties. So as you can imagine, the townspeople are just now finding out because they don't advertise these things very much. And of course people are irate. You know, they're very worried. And because they live here because of this beautiful desert. And they don't want it to be destroyed. Okay, so now here we are spraying down the road, the site. And this is what they'll do all over the site. They'll just spray it down in order to control dust. But of course, it doesn't really control dust because the water dries. And I mean, of course, the soil over time will become compacted as these heavy machineries drive on it. But, you know, overall, once we remove the topsoil, that nice desert pavement, it's just irrecoverable. I've been told that they use about 350,000 gallons of water per day during construction. Okay, so we are just starting the construction phase, and so during this construction phase, they use about 350,000 gallons per day. And then they will use water ongoing, but I need to find out how much water that is. Okay, so we're looking towards Mount Charleston and Highway 160. And my name's Shannon. I'm out here just to protest this development, document the destruction, and I'm with a group called mojavegreen.org, and we are just kind of getting our feet on the ground, getting started, and we're going to have a lot of activist events out here, and we are raising awareness about the need to rethink green. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon. Stay tuned.